wait for a few more minutes. I don't think today will be a super long meeting, but so Richard and Anil, how did you guys end up finding out about this initiative?
I subscribed to the CD Foundation newsletter, and I think it was a blurb in the newsletter asking for volunteers. So that's how I got involved.
I send the newsletter. I'm glad it worked. Sometimes it just feels like emailing nobody. You know, I know the numbers are there, but yeah.
I know what you mean.
For me, like I was in a Data Days conference, Lisa. I saw your,
Okay, awesome.
and I saw your slide where it was talking about this. I thought like, and I should just give it a try. I submitted a form there itself while you were talking. So
Fantastic. So are you based out of Austin then?
yes.
Yeah, very nice. And how about you, Richard?
Same thing, based out of Austin.
Oh, yeah. Who knew that DataOps was such a hot topic in Texas?
Hey, good morning.
Hey, Victor. For the slides today, Roxanne, should I present or should you present?
You want. Do you want me to present?
Sure, I have some of my slides at the end, and so I could just ask you to move forward, but I guess for the CDF stuff, do you want to go over some of that and then I'll go into the DataOps stuff? Yeah, that sounds good.
So these are the notes. You can add questions here or, you know, put your name in there. And you can see my slides.
Yes.
All right. Cool. So some of you already know that the CD Foundation's mission is to improve the world's capacity to deliver software with security and speed. We host open source projects, we have members, and our goal is just to be the place where everybody meets and, you know, does their best work to improve continuous delivery, CI/CD. That includes DevOps and DataOps and all of the other things that it touches. A lot of people ask like why it's not within the CNCF if there's Argo CD over there. It was just because CNCF is so big and has so many focuses, they thought that it would be good to have a continuous delivery foundation. Here's what we do. We're worldwide. We try to serve all our projects, as I said. Education, so as the DataOps initiative is, we try to make trainings and help people learn the best practices for continuous delivery. And we have a governing board that's made up of our members. And so they decide what we do. So it's not like a dictatorship, you know? So if you do want to join as a member, you can lead and decide what we're going to do next. The DC, Sanika, is our board chair right now. Michelle works for the Linux Foundation. She's our project manager. And I do all of the content. These are our open source projects. CD Events is our newest and most buzzing one. Jenkins is our oldest one. And yeah, the other ones are also very great. Special interest groups, they come and go. We had a few and then they merged. These are the active ones. Best practices and MLOps were led by Terry Cox. We're not sure if he's still interested in leading. Sorry, did someone have a question? Oh. So if ever you're interested in leading a special interest group, let us know and, you know, we can make a proposal to the Technical Oversight Committee. The Cybersecurity SIG is very new. They meet next week on February 18th, and it would be their third meeting. So, yeah. These are our members. That's self-explanatory. And we have a landscape that we're working on. It's interactive and always growing. So if you have a project that you want to add there, you can do so. It's all like open on GitHub. You just do a pull request. And I think, Lisa, you were saying that we want to maybe make a DataOps section as well.
Yeah, I would definitely be interested in a
Oh.
DataOps landscape.
Yeah. And our annual CDCon, this will be our 6th event. It's in Denver, and the CFP is open. It closes this Sunday. So if you do want to propose a talk, it's time to do so. And then over to you, Lisa.
Awesome. Thanks everybody for coming today. I see some familiar faces, so I'm really happy. I think generally speaking, we understand that the part of this initiative is branching off from what is traditionally a DevOps organization. And so we're thinking, why all the data engineering stuff all of a sudden? And really my idea here is that, a lot of the traditional data engineering and data ops tools that we see, a lot of the MLOps tools, are actually remixed DevOps tools that have been reflavored in some sort of way. And I think that there's a lot of traditional tooling that is still applicable to a lot of this work, but also I think it's very important for us within the data community to educate our fellow, DevOps engineering friends on kind of what the specific needs are for our applications that we build so that they can better enable and help us. And so I would love to see over time for that landscape to include projects like Apache Unicorn or Spark, or just like or MLflow or Kubeflow, all of these amazing projects that have come out to really help aid in this area and to start using applications like Spinnaker or CD events or Tecton for traditional data and ML workloads. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go over this too much because I think generally if you're here, you kind of understand some of the basic differences here. But generally speaking, when we think about delivering high quality software, we think of a traditional DevOps frameworks. But when we want to apply this to, say, a traditional data pipeline or machine learning framework, there's a lot of different flavors to that and aspects that maybe we don't consider. But generally speaking, I think that iterability and continuous delivery is something that can still be very much applied to data ops. Same thing with agile, same thing with, cloud native frameworks and all of these different things that we're currently using. When we think about the main key differences though, I think one of the really large keys here is thinking about managing data debt as one of the key goals of bringing in something like data ops to bring down. So if we're looking at traditional, next slide, please. So if we're looking at traditional technical debt, we think of a giant legacy code base that maybe has a lot of orphaned pieces of code or something that's really messy. But when we think about data debt instead, we think about data silos. We think about the inability to access all of our data and to have, maybe old stale data that we don't necessarily know we can track or observe in some sort of meaningful way. And there's a lot of other sources of data debt that can occur too, such as, having a lot of different multimodal pieces of data or open data formats that you might be juggling, all these heterogeneous data sources that you're trying to consolidate. Of course, I think the data space, and at least the MLOps space in particular, is a little bit notorious right now for really going through rapid tooling changes. This is something that's creating a lot of debt in production. And generally speaking, it's very hard for engineers on the DevOps side to really keep up with, what's still relevant, what are people using, what can I help with, and really managing the complexity of data architecture. I think people are fairly familiar with the concept of a data lake now, but there's also, data mesh and, other distributed data frameworks and these different data systems that have really complicated our ability to understand intuitively what kind of data architecture maybe our organization has. Next slide, please. So again, if we're looking at data platforming as kind of this next wave of data architecture versus just having one single lakehouse, and then you process that data through different iterations, generally speaking, we want to create these undercurrents that allow us to create safe access to data and reliable data systems. So how do we, separate out our different environments for our data production? How do we actually control the permission management around that? How do we create some observability metrics? And how do we actually version control maybe our databases and manage our dependencies? ideally, of course, there's a data ops team that would do this in an organization, but that's not always feasible. And I think that's part of what this initiative is about, is if a data engineering team is expected to take care of all of this, but they don't have the tools or the know-how to, and a DevOps team might be roped in to help with some of this stuff too, but they don't know, some of the undercurrents that are going on there, some of the special flavors of applications that you're dealing with, or even maybe what goes into a data pipeline, then the work actually doesn't get done, right? There's people who are just not going to do it at all, because the ownership is not necessarily well defined, and neither is the knowledge sharing. So it's really important that we create a common learning platform where engineers can knowledge share, and so that we can better enable some of the key skills that our team members bring to this. Next slide, please. So again, if we consider the different domains that we have here between DevOps and DataOps and MLOps, I think that there are very specific scopes for each one. We're also going to include some MLOps into what we do as well. So if you're interested in writing or contributing materials around MLOps, I certainly do not want to hold you back. I think that, just generally speaking, for naming conventions, creating something like a DataOps initiative is more interesting, just in terms of creating something that's a little bit more end-to-end. I see MLOps as like the subset of DataOps in a lot of ways as well. I'm happy to, listen to maybe why that might not be necessarily the case. But generally speaking, I also want to give a lot more work here and eyes to the actual data architecture and data set management that goes into it as well. I think that there's a lot of material out there around MLOps already, and some of it is very quick and some of it is moving very fast. And I think that it's up to us as the CD Foundation to be an authority on what tools that people can trust, how to assess different tools, how to ensure that a tool is ready for production deployment, and all of these different things that I think that we do extremely well. Next slide, please. So again, additional sources of data debt, but generally speaking, I think one of the really large issues that's making it hard for this knowledge sharing to occur is that there's a lot of silos and complexity. In terms of data complexity, I think that it's no surprise to anybody that data architecture has become very complex and has a very high need to be quite performant. And we have a lot of different tools that are merging the transactional and the analytical workloads at the moment. And so you might have, Kafka interoperable with like an open table format or your data lakehouse, and you need to be able to kind of manage both. And real time is also a really big part of this. And this is becoming very difficult to manage alongside your government regulations like GDPR and stuff like that. And so it's very punishing to have bad data ops practices in this area. And then, of course, we mentioned kind of the teams that are going to be siloed as a part of that, where one team might work specifically in a warehouse environment, one team might work in big data, and another team might work purely in transactional workloads. And so there's a lot of different stratification that will occur and silos that will occur just in terms of knowledge sharing between teams in the same organization. I think I was having a conversation with somebody about this recently, where the top-down view of what an organization might know is completely different than the next team over. So the top-down view of an organization that, let's say, a security team has or a DevOps team has will be very different from, say, a data engineering team. And this is all driven by metadata. So Anil, if you were there at Day-to-Day Texas, this is a conversation that I had with Ol actually, and kind of on his ideas of metagrid. So I think that there's a lot of things that can be done to link some of the knowledge on like this metadata level as well, that can reduce some of these team silos. And of course, machine learning teams are nimble. They work in an R&D environment. They're very fast. And so the tools that they're using and stuff that they're building is not meant to necessarily deploy to production right away, but it's also meant to be cutting edge. They don't want to be bogged down by productionizing something. But when you do realize that something is kind of a winner, you then have this huge problem of trying to convert all of this like really scrappy code into something that's application worthy, right? Next slide, please. So this is kind of why I think the CDF is really important in this particular idea as well, where if we're moving from accessing a database in particular to actually serving data to the rest of our organization, I think, one thing that DevOps teams does really well is deploying services, right? Maybe not necessarily deploying databases, but deploying services. And I think that when we consider this framework change of how people are accessing and using data, this comes with a lot of different expectations in terms of service levels, what kind of web services we have, whether or not we're going to create like an API around this thing, and what kind of requests that we might expect, and also some of the actual large distributed functionality around it. Is this going to be something that's somewhat elastic in terms of our resources? Are we going to have some sort of fault tolerance here? Things like that. And so a lot of the data engineers who traditionally maintain data warehouses all of a sudden became data platform engineers overnight, it seemed. And then with a platform, you have a lot of these other skills and tools that maybe you didn't necessarily have before. And so now as data engineers, we're now wondering, how do we actually write a good service? How do we actually write something that can be treated well in an organization and is usable? And this is something that I think that we should be borrowing from our DevOps friends. Next slide, please. So this DataOps initiative, as many of you have seen at some point here already, is really meant to be a series of technical materials and guides that follow sort of this end-to-end process of like inception to deployment of different data intensive, or at least machine learning or generative AI applications. And some of this is really meant to be, if you're a data engineer, you're an MLOps engineer, coming in with very basic knowledge of what DevOps is, can you get caught up in time? But also, if you're a DevOps engineer who's now in charge of deploying this, machine learning application, working on it, do you have the lingo to be able to understand exactly all the different moving components? And then kind of what are the best practices that we can expect around this? And so there's a lot of different resources around the internet, some that are vendor driven, some that are, done by experts. And generally speaking, they all fall on a different spectrum between what's usable and what's not, and what is more vendor neutral or less. And I think that having a large comprehensive body of materials that can be an authority in this field is really going to be quite important in standardizing everything. Something like a data contract, which is very similar to an API contract, might sound very good in theory, but which tool are you going to use? What are some of the fundamentals that you want to be able to implement something like this? And is your organization ready for something like that? These are the kind of questions that we want to answer and get say in when it comes to all of these different things around the organization. Next up, please. So our roadmap right now, we're keeping it really simple. We've been doing this for like a minute, but we've been kind of on a slow start. And so generally speaking, we want to really start by creating a series of blog posts that kind of really help us flesh out the material and get us into the groove of raising awareness of this initiative, but also to help people get some of their ideas out in terms of, what might be worth writing about and what's not, and what people are really receptive to. And some of this is going to help us really flesh out some of the curriculum that we have for what's going to eventually become, one day a certification, we hope. But generally speaking, we want to just make sure that we're getting that material out. We're collaborating with OPIA on this, so the Open Platform for Enterprise AI, which I also run the Developer Experience Working Group for as well. So I think that a lot of that material will also be applied back into enterprise AI systems, which we're really hoping to. And then, of course, as things move along, we're going to have actual courses and chapter materials kind of developed out. And the idea here is that if we took, say, some of the same messy architecture and we showed people how to actually tackle some of this like behemoth architecture that's out there in very practical ways with hands-on materials, would that be useful? And I think the general idea is yes, and really trying to create something that's standardized and polished out of that. Next up, please. So this is kind of some of our curriculum. I'm going to go over some of the topics that might be worth writing about as you're doing this work with the CDF as well. Generally speaking, I think that we've broken this up into a lot of the different fundamentals and operational components that you'll see in kind of standing up a data platform. AI ML in this case is a little bit smaller, again, because this is more of a DataOps initiative, but please don't let this particular, limitation prevent you from writing from stuff that's outside of the scope. I think that this will be extensible at some sort of point. But generally speaking, if you want to write about, managing data quality or data governance, you're more than welcome to. I think that those are great topics to have, as well as, say, working with data on Kubernetes, I think is a really interesting topic to go over. Same with, say, like stateful workloads, but also really general things like what are some, environment tools that you might recommend? What are some like really, good, clean, like really basic code version control tools that you might be using and how to set things up properly. I think that we've all had to deal with at some point, trying to take code that's been stored in a Jupyter notebook and then trying to make it scale in some sort of way. So these are really things that we're really interested in looking at. And there's a lot of different topics here. Don't feel overwhelmed that you have to write on all of this, but there's just some examples of things that you can contribute to. Next slide, please. Some other strategy domains, I think all of the things that I mentioned in terms of the curriculum fall in one of these 4 fields, but generally speaking, our goals are to really create materials around, how to create observable data systems, for instance. So under accuracy and data quality, how do we use traditional tools to be able to assess some of these things, and how do we also ensure data quality as well on a basic level? This is a really large issue in organizations, and it really comes down to hygiene of data. And then, of course, how do we create, data reliable systems that really, take from traditional DevOps concepts? And then, of course, how do we, create some of these tools that help us assess more of the traditional data engineering stuff like lineage, and metadata management, either through like a data catalog, et cetera. And I think a really important tool to kind of help create this is how do we create access systems that make sense in terms of ownership? How do we make sure that everybody is using the same tools here and managing their permissions in a way that makes sense? And how do we implement zero trust within a data system as well? Next slide, please. So if these are kind of going into some very specific examples that you might be interested in working on, of course, don't let this limit you. I'm very excited to have some more experimental ideas come forth too. But generally speaking, I think that these are some really cool examples and tools of stuff that you might be interested in including in your blog post or writing around it. Generally speaking, such as like, how do we create like an incident run book for something like a data team? How do we stand up like a Grafana instance that helps us, really understand where data is coming from or the health of our data services. And then, of course, how do we use different things like, data contracts to ensure that we have like certain service level agreements, and how do we, say, implement something like GitOps in a data pipeline if that's something that we're interested in, and how do we write good documentation? I think this is the last slide. Next slide. Yeah, so you guys have seen this already and you guys are already through this, but generally speaking, we're looking for people to contribute material and to edit material as well. And of course, people who are willing to take this sort of stuff and then bring it out and champion it into the larger community and evangelize some of it as well. So generally speaking, we have these meetings, I think it's once every 2 weeks or once monthly. I'm always around, of course, and if Roxana is too. So you're welcome to contact us on the Slack, and you're welcome to just reach out to us directly. And yeah, next slide. I think that's it. Yeah. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer it. I just wanted to make sure that at least in one of these meetings, I went over what our expectations were in terms of DataOps, and kind of what some of those next steps were. I think right now we're really looking to have people who are interested in proposing and adding different blog posts that then we can assign editors to, and who will help kind of flesh out some of these ideas around that, and then kind of create this body of work around it. So, are there any questions at all?
Lisa, yeah, thanks for the content.
Yeah.
One question I have is about the Slack channel. What's the Slack channel that we should join just to, you know,
You
contact?
can message me and I will add you. One
Yes.
second.
Yeah, the Continuous Delivery Foundation has a Slack for all of its projects. And so we're including a DataOps channel in there as well for folks. And good to see you too, Muktesh. I'm excited to see you here. So I think one of the things that we can go over now is maybe some areas of expertise that some people are interested in contributing to. I don't have the form open right now, but if you have some ideas in terms of the general like field that you're interested in and whether or not you're an editor or you are proposing as a writer, we can just do like a round of the room and then kind of see, you know, where people are and talk about some potential topics that you can add into. So I can go first. So my name is, of course, Lisa. We can do a quick introduction too, since I think we have the time. But generally speaking, I'm quite interested in the data ops side of things, especially when it comes to orchestration. I'm also interested in like data cataloging and metadata management specifically. So if we took something like a data catalog or a metadata management system, can we service this for both DevOps tooling and you know, traditional data engineering tools? And that's kind of the stuff that I'm very interested in contributing to. Right now, I'm trying to put together this blog post for like creating a data product based on the idea of an SBOM. So if you took this idea of like what an SBOM entailed and you created a data product around that, what would that look like? And that's something that I'm currently working on, and hopefully we'll be ready for a review by the end of the week by a fantastic technical editor. So yeah. Anil, I'm probably going to call on you next if you're welcome to join in.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Anil. I'm based out of Austin, Texas. My experience has been like, you know, for the past 2 decades. First decade has been more on full stack development, on more on like, you know, end-to-end application development from the UI all the way to the backend systems, including middleware stuff. But last 9 years, 9 to 10 years has been completely on data side. So building data pipelines using open source tech stack is my area of work, where I was doing pretty much you know, end to end, starting with the development of data pipelines. I'm not a DevOps or data ops like, you know, expertise, but I know about all this because I work with the teams quite frequently with my DataOps folks. My experience is more on the programming side, like, you know, where like I've been building data pipelines, building you know, Java, Python based implementations and all that kind of stuff. And recently, for the past couple of years, has been like, of course, that's how I got to your meeting, Lisa, on Apache Gravity and other stuff. I've been doing a lakehouse architecture here in the current job, where building the whole data pipeline using modern data stack, end-to-end data pipelines, and end-to-end data platform enablement. That includes whatever you mentioned in the slides, all those details. So it's exciting opportunity for me to share my knowledge and gain the knowledge from this group. That's my intention, and I'm trying to do as much contribution as possible wherever I can contribute.
Thank you so much for sharing. I love that idea of, because you're really at the inception stage right now. And I like that story of, you know, if I were to be in charge of standing something up from scratch, or like right now in this particular part of my organization, what does that journey look like? And what are the things that I'm going to assess? And I think that it would be really interesting, Anil, as you're going through this process in your organization, to kind of note down some of the conversations that you're having, some of the things that you're assessing in your organization, because I think that's really valuable information. I think that oftentimes we jump into a really messy place, right? That's already well developed. And we don't necessarily see, how did we get there from the beginning? And if you're willing to write something like that, I would love to have it. Next up, I'm gonna call on some names. Richard, if you want to go next.
Yeah, I'm Rich Boyd. I've supported big data workloads from the DevOps side of the house in the past for a couple of startups here in the Austin, Texas area where I'm based. When I was at Amazon, I was one of the well-architected pillar leads, and I helped write the operations pillar for the machine learning lens. So like uh, I've got a lot of background in content writing and content editing and proofreading. So that's really where my interests lie with the DataOps initiative. I'm just really fascinated by the space. It's kind of the Wild West right now. So like there's there's a lot of opportunity to kind of define what good looks like for the industry. And so I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really excited to have you and to have people who are also not just technical experts, but who know what good content look like, who knows what, is interesting to folks and how to present information, because I think that is half the battle here. And I'd love to hear if you have any specific ideas of whether or not you would want to start as like a writer or an editor and kind of what those specific domains are. Having somebody from Amazon is also very useful because I think generally speaking, most of us have touched the AWS stack at some point. And so really understanding the tooling is super important.
Awesome.
Next, Victor, if you want to go, I know that we've had some conversations already and would love to introduce you to the rest of the team.
Yeah, I'm Victor Liu, based in Tampa, Florida. Actually, been to Austin many times because I worked for Oracle USA for 17 years. So yeah, I've been doing database for gosh, how many times? How many years? 27 years. So at this point in my career, I'm interested in a lot of things. So basically anything open source is what I'm interested in, and I can definitely tell this is a super important initiative. So definitely, I think good job. What you described is a very, very on the point. This is something that need to be analyzed. And when it comes to my contribution, there's a lot of things I'm interested in. For example, including the SBOM part. I don't know if we can talk about here or not, but there's definitely a lot of different aspects for how to start from. But one area, as I discussed last 2 weeks ago, is the possibility of starting from a so-called AI-driven data cloud. I think data cloud is a term you borrow from the internet from like existing very popular term. But I think there's a lot more that can be done, which is not being done yet. I think it can be a part of this discussion here. So I definitely look forward to it, and probably discuss more after everybody introduce themselves.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Victor. I'm very excited, hilariously enough, to have an Oracle guy here because I think that a lot of us still struggle with some Oracle databases for sure. And I think that there's an emergence that's happening where we're trying to make legacy stacks work with new modern stacks. And the interoperability piece is a really important part of DataOps, in my opinion. And I think, I'd love to hear more about your ideas around, like, what was it, the AI-driven data cloud. I think that this is a really cool piece, and like I really want to explore that for sure. Happy to talk more about SBOMs. We'll have some time after introductions. Muktesh, I'm going to call on you next to kind of go into your background.
Yeah. Hey, Lisa, Roxanne, good to see you. So I'm a part of CD Foundation. I'm a CD Foundation ambassador. So my career, I work for Adobe as a lead engineer. Recently, I got reorged like 6 months back. So I work in applied AI and foundations now. Super focused on platform engineering and developer productivity in general. So we are building tools and platform for developers for entire CI/CD, like code, build, test, deploy, or monitoring or post deployment. How AI can help in that. And part of that is data is fundamental. So any machine learning or AI workload, data, you need to have the data, and data comes with data comes a lot of challenges in terms of processing, in terms of quality, registration. Right now I'm focused on building a cataloging solution or registry solution, which is generic enough. And I think, Lisa, this is what we have talked about in the past. Yeah, so looking forward to work with all of you. And I'm interested in editor and proofreading roles. And yeah, that's what pretty much it is.
Yeah, Muktash is also very humble. He just released a book for CI/CD design patterns. Feel free to plug it or put a link down below. I think that a lot of the stuff there is super interesting, and I have a copy on my shelf somewhere. So I'm gonna definitely get you to sign it. But that's interesting that you mentioned the cataloging. So Anil mentioned too, our company works on an open source project called Apache Gravitino. And we recently added a model registry to our catalog, which is something that's kind of like still experimental. It's currently being designed for production, but generally speaking, a lot of the ideas, a traditional data catalog gathers metadata and manages data, usually in a lakehouse format. But can you also extend that into, say, the data sets that are used in machine learning workloads and actually manage the models in some sort of way using the same permission management system instead of having like these different frameworks? A lot of the machine learning stuff out there is around experiment tracking, which is great for reproducibility, but not so great for like, hey, can we use this as the backbone for all of our different like permission management systems that we need? So yeah, I'm happy to discuss more about the SBOM stuff, but Victor, if you want to go into some of the AI-driven data cloud ideas that you have, I think that's a really exciting place, and I'm curious to hear more about it.
Maybe just start from, since I mentioned Oracle database, start from there. So I just shared a link to, it's basically the latest version of Oracle database that, if you use Oracle database, that you probably know that in the past, the actual authentication authorization mechanism is all kind of within the Oracle database itself. It's kind of metadata within the database itself, right? But now Oracle database has evolved to a certain point that, you can have a external identity management, like for example, in this case, Azure directories. I think it's called a different name. What is it called? I forgot. Entra ID for authentication, and so it's more fine-grained authentication authorization. So this is the Oracle database. But if you look at what's happening in the open source ecosystem, the database, open source database, whether it's relational or non-relational, in most of the cases, it doesn't have as much fine-grained authentication authorization mechanism. And regardless of Oracle database or any other database, in the past, all the security authentication authorization is done by sort of by the middle tier, by the application itself, right? But now, in the age of AI, and especially in the age of agentic AI, there's a concept called 2Us. So more and more, the middle tier, you can no longer have like a static middle tier anymore. So because of that, there's really a need to on the infrastructure side, because when we're talking about DataOps, we're talking about how data flow, between the different users, applications, backends, mapping and all that stuff, right? But before we can even do that, if we don't have a kind of a governance framework to make sure that whoever talk to whom has actual privilege, then we really cannot do much. There's a lot of security and safety issue, right? For example, safety. I know security is the bigger concern right now, and safety is it depends on which country you're in. So let's say if you have an AI agent that's going to you tell the AI agent to do something, to look up some data, right? So that by default, that database user should have full access to all the data, right? So but because it didn't have like a middle tier logic anymore, it can do anything to that table. It can, so that's become a huge safety issue, because one time if the AI agent become a super intelligence, it can do whatever with the data, and in turn tell the robot to do whatever it want to do. That's why I think it's before we can let the data flow, we need to have a kind of a define the frameworks to make sure that security is the authentication authorization is have a fine-grained definitions. So I'll stop there. Any I guess comments, question about that?
I definitely have a lot of ideas. I think that you brought in something like really big and chewy to the table, but I want to open up the floor to anybody else who wants to go first and kind of add in their ideas before I go. If not, then yeah, I think that this is a really interesting problem, and kind of what I see at least. So what our company does is at its core, like an open data catalog solution. And part of that catalog is around this idea of controlling the access management for agents to work on governed data specifically, and defining what data is safe for access and which isn't. But the access management, even under that, is quite hard to manage, like because of all these different namespaces, all these different technologies. Like there's no one universal system that works. Like IAM is not universal. And so we've had to do like kind of this push down access management model to be able to kind of manage all of the systems underneath, which makes it quite complicated to work with. But even then, like just managing all the different tokens, all of the different, ways that you're accessing, it becomes quite messy. But the idea is that eventually you will have that middle logic layer for, say, something like an agent or RAG framework to be able to directly pull and interact with. But it is quite difficult. I love to see that Oracle is on this too, though. And so do you know anybody who is currently using this and kind of what their, I guess, experience has been? I also want to add into that, I don't know if Anil, you were there, but we had a discussion with the creator of MetaGrid. So his name is Ole. And he had this really fun idea of, if you had a metadata system that was decentralized, would you be able to maintain the metadata? So this is the flip side of it, of maintaining those metadata systems with actual agents, to be able to pull metadata from other sources and then to be able to maintain some sort of architecture where that metadata would be in place. But I think generally speaking, that's almost, solving the problem with more AI, where you have all these agents that are accessing data free for all. And then can you control who's accessing what by using other agentic technologies? So there's a lot of really interesting ideas there for sure. Victor, I don't know if that touches exactly what you're talking on, but
yeah, that's why originally I proposed this topic to be discussed in the DOK, Data on Kubernetes community, and I think that's probably a joint effort between this group and that community is probably a good start. Yeah, I think it's too big a topic. I know I have a lot of different additional deeper thoughts on this, but I think we need to probably kind of subgroup or kind of offline. So you probably can go to the next topic.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Can we have that noted in the meeting minutes too, to follow up with the DOK community on this? And I think that having like an open source solution is probably where we want to go with it, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Awesome. So I think we also wanted to talk a little bit about SBOMs as well and what that looked like. So in one of the unconference discussions at a conference I was at recently, the same one that I met Anil at, we had this big talk around defining what was called a data product, which is kind of like, what does a prepackaged data product look like? How do we serve data products to other members in the organization or externally? And there was a lot of debate, even just around the fluffy parts of defining what a data product was, what it included, and all of these things. And in the middle of that discussion, I mentioned, why not just pull from what an SBOM is or what a data bomb would be if we were to conceptualize one. And to my surprise, at least, like nobody else in the room knew what an SBOM was. And that was kind of a little concerning to me. But generally speaking, I think that when we started listing out some of the components that make an SBOM, there was a lot of interest in terms of, what, this could be quite applicable to a data product. And so I think one of the key questions that we have is, if we were to create an equivalent of a data bomb, how would we define that? What kind of metadata would we expect in something like that? And then the second is, how would we implement something like that? So we've been talking a little bit with the data contracts community to create some of that, but we also have kind of the blog post in early stages. I don't know if Roxanne, you have the link available, but I'm happy to share it with folks and have them kind of dive in and introduce some ideas that they might have or contribute to it in some way, or really help flesh out some of these ideas, because I think that it would be very interesting. let me go to the drive. But yeah, that was kind of just generally what the idea was, to kind of create this bill of materials. So I think I have it here, so I'm going to share my screen. Everybody can see this, I guess?
Yep.
Yeah. So this term was actually coined a little bit ago, and so we're not completely new to the idea. And it was by like a licensed organization, which I think makes sense that it would come more from the legal side. But generally speaking, an SBOM is used in a lot of security pipelines to kind of ensure the origins of a particular software product and package, and kind of understand a little bit more about who can use it, things like that. And so I think from this point onwards, it did not necessarily pick up traction, but it is something that I would like to introduce as potentially either a new standard or something that people in the data community, as they're designing data products on the governance side, to be more aware of. And so it's a really great blog post. I think I'm also going to, yeah, you guys have the link already. And so we've decided to start building out some of the things that we would have in here in terms of what this blog post might look like, and including this outline. I'm happy to have people add into it in any sort of way, but generally, I think that the concept of just like a one-to-one mapping might make sense in terms of, you know, what it might look like to have like a data license, for instance. If they do exist, who's using them? What can we expect in terms of particular data product? And who can use it, and what does it contain? Can we include information like lineage or source in there? And really, you know, maybe some of the processing scripts that were used in it, what kind of tools might have been involved, and things like that. I could see this being a tough issue in terms of scoping, how much information you want to package in there. But I think there is kind of a sweet spot for what's useful for other data professionals to look like, and in particular for governance as well. And in terms of in practice, so we discussed one of the like these concepts with some of the folks from the data contracting community. Mark Freeman was kind of in that conversation, and he works with Gable. And so if you did have, say, something like a data bomb and you implemented it in something like a data contract, could you build some sort of SLA around it? Could you implement this at the contract level or at the catalog level? And these are kind of the ideas that we're fleshing out now. And so it's a little bit more like not necessarily grounded, but I am happy to hear what other people might be thinking about when it comes to these sort of things, and whether or not it's even something that's applicable, right? Is this something that is completely off chart harder than what we want to do? And, you know, is it even something that makes sense? Yeah, I'd love to hear anybody's initial thoughts, but this is kind of where we're at so far.
Yeah, I'm not sure. And well, so definitely this is needed. I'm right now a generalist. After I left Oracle in 2022, end of 2022, I'm active in the open source community. So one goal I have is to understand every single open source community and what's going on and what's important. So if you look at the reason, the most really a huge reason is this called CRA, EU CRA, Cyber Resilience Act. I cannot pronounce that name word correctly. So one of the requirements is every product that's going to sell in the EU market that have a digital component is required to attach SBOM. That's software bill of material. However, when we're talking about that, because nowadays software have an AI component, right? Has a model, and with that come with related data information as well. So any bill of material, including whether it's software, even hardware data, is going to be related. So bill of material definitely is a and coming also look at the so-called EU AI Act, which have a lot of different requirements. And specifically, they discussed about because I'm also working in our working group, EU Act Total Conduct Working Group. It's a huge problem. Try to find a lineage, how to identify the licensing requirement, legal requirement, which data contains which data, whether data is meet all this licensing legal requirements, etc. So definitely, I think it's a necessary topic.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. I would love to, do you know if there's a specific case that we can point at of like somebody trying to meet this requirement, but maybe failing because of not having something like this? Like, I'd love to create like a case study around where something like this might make a difference, because I think putting the idea out there is good, but showing something actionable is really where some of the juice is.
Depend on how you look at it, right? Because the one I just mentioned is about more of the product reliability, legal purpose, security, safety, those purpose. There's also the aspect of in a scientific field, so-called science research reproducibility, right? So when you do some research and you publish paper, and how do you know that that information is reliable? Someone take your research and try to do the same thing and find the result is totally different, right? So with kind of lineage information, you can not easily, at least it's possible to reproduce the same scientific result. So yeah, so there's a lot of context, but it can be used in multiple scenarios.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. Let's see. I would love to create even like a makeup scenario, like even if it was using a theoretical company that might be going through this. I found a sort of an article that I'm going to read through a little bit later that goes over some of this stuff, but it seems like generally speaking that this is something that's really applicable. Would anybody be interested in helping kind of develop what this case study might look like? If not, that's okay, since I think that this is a very specific topic, an area of interest, but I might see if I can come up with something and then have one of us go over it either in the group or as like an editor.
I'm always happy to review, but
We're talking about SBOM, so I'm not sure there's a two commonly accepted when it comes to bill of material. I mean, there are other data sets that's being used as metadata for metadata, right? But when it comes to SBOM, and so there are two formats. SPDX is probably the one that's most commonly accepted as the ISO standard, and in SPDX there's a so-called data profile. So that's basically data bomb as the name you're using. Oh, by the way, I think there's a tendency at this point to call it bill instead of data bomb. Most likely it probably, for example, there's called AI bomb, right? I think there's a discussion about that should be called AI S bomb. So maybe in this case it will be called data S bomb instead of data bomb.
Okay, I'm looking into the AI bomb right now. This is really interesting. I actually am a little bit weirded out that there's an AI bomb, but not like a fully set data bomb out there, which is funny because I feel like both are kind of necessary to each other. So I'm looking at some of these like really specific, like just very general articles that are out there. And I think there's some really interesting information in here. This is great. Thank you for putting this in. Oh, this is fantastic. Okay, we're gonna reach out to some of the guys behind this project because I think that this is something that is exactly what we're looking at. And I actually, even though this is the Linux Foundation, I didn't know that this existed. So this is great.
There could potentially be a big overlap between this AI bomb and data bomb, Lisa, that you're trying to see from the contracts and data sets involvement perspective, looks like.
Yeah, no, this is great. And I don't want to create a separate data bomb if an AI bomb exists, because I think that's one of the big pain points that we have is reinventing things and separating them out. We don't need more confusion, especially if it's coming as an open standard.
I will need to kick everyone out in 4 minutes for another meeting.
Yeah. This is great. I think that this is some good stuff that I can go over and research a little bit more. If anybody knows any of the folks involved with this project, I'd love to have them actually contribute and push the project out.
Let me talk to you offline.
Yes, of course. Awesome. Yeah, I think that we can end this meeting here. I think that for our first meeting, we did a good job of going through the overview and getting into some meaty stuff. I think it makes me really excited for the future. And honestly, there's a ton of really incredibly smart people who ended up showing up to this, and I'm very excited to see these minds come together. Roxanne, do you know when our next meeting is?
Yes, it's in 2 weeks, so on the 26th.
Okay. We're having them pretty frequently, just to make sure that we keep on top of everything. Don't feel like you need to come to every single meeting. But yeah, generally speaking, I think that this is a good place to end off. Thank you for coming, and of course to anybody watching the recording. We'd love to have you at the next one for sure.
Thank you all.
Thanks. Have a good
Thanks,
day.
everybody.
Bye.